I have stood a great many posts in my years under the crown, and most of them ask nothing of a man but that he keep his feet and keep his silence. The one that mattered most asked me to keep my eyes. I want that understood before I tell the rest of it, because people who hear this story afterward tend to make me into something I am not. They call it courage, or loyalty, or an old soldier's instinct. It was none of those things, or not chiefly. It was only that I had spent 9 years standing in a narrow stone stair with nothing to do but watch, and a man who watches long enough learns the difference between a thing that is ordinary and a thing that is merely dressed as ordinary. That difference is the whole of it. Everything I did because I noticed a wax seal was the wrong color, and because I could not make myself forget it. My name is Wystan Rooke. On the day the King of Eldermoor nearly died in front of half his capital, I was standing 4 paces behind him with a rifle I would not have been permitted to fire, watching the back of his head, and I already knew. That is the part that has never left me. I knew before he swayed. I had known for the better part of a day and had told no one, because there was no one I could tell who would not have laughed at me. And by the time I understood that laughter did not matter, the balcony doors were open and the trumpets had sounded, and it was too late to do anything but catch him. Let me go back 3 nights to the stair, because that is where it truly began. The Palace of Harrogate is an old pile of a place, added to by every reign until it makes no sense as a building, only as a history. The king's private apartments sit at the top of the East Range, and the only proper way up to them is a spiral of worn stone the household calls the inner stair. 2 men guard it through the night in turns. It is not a glamorous post. Nothing happens on the inner stair. Kings do not receive assassins on their own back staircase. That is what the whole rest of the palace is for. The inner stair is where the king goes to bed, and where his physician goes up at dusk with a small brown bottle, and where the maids carry warming pans and clean linen, and where, in 9 years, the most exciting thing I had ever seen was a footman drop a tray of pheasant. So I noticed when the Queen Consort came down it at an hour, she had no business being on it at all. I should say plainly, since it colors everything that follows, that Queen Consort Morwenna and I had never exchanged more than the words a great lady exchanges with a fixture. To her, I was part of the wall. That suited me. She was the king's second wife, married 4 years by then, a handsome, composed woman with a low, pleasant voice, and a way of making every room arrange itself around her the moment she entered it. The court admired her. The court, in my experience, admires whoever seems least likely to trip. She had brought 2 grown children of her own into the household from her first marriage, Lord Cassius, who was clever and restless and always seemed to be calculating the distance between himself and something he wanted, and Lady Verena, who was softer and sadder and, I came to think later, knew more than she let herself know. But that is getting ahead. That night I was on the low turn of the stair near the still-room door, and it was well past the hour when the apartments go quiet. The king had been abed since 10, and down the spiral, without a candle, moving as if she knew every stone in the dark, came the Queen Consort. She was not dressed for bed. She had a dark traveling cloak over a plain gown, the kind of clothes a great lady wears when she does not wish to be a great lady for an hour. Behind her, a step down, came a man I half knew, a lean, courteous fellow named Sebastien Fenn, an apothecary the household had taken on some weeks before. He carried a small case. Neither of them expected to meet a guardsman on the low turn, I think, because Morwenna checked for the smallest instant when she saw me. The way you check when you set your foot down on a stair that is not where you thought the stair would be. Then she smiled and said, "The king sleeps poorly. Master Fenn has been settling his rest." And she went on down past me and Fenn behind her, and the still-room door, the little vaulted room where the physician kept the king's medicines under lock, clicked shut, and I heard the tumble of the lock, and they were gone into the lower passages. That was all. I want you to feel how small it was. A wife, worried for a husband's sleep, walking a physician up in the night. There is nothing in it. 9 men out of 10 would have thought nothing, and rightly. But I had stood that stair 9 years, and in 9 years the king's medicines had been the province of exactly one man, and that man was not Sebastin Fen. His name was Master Alwyn Call, and he had physicked the royal house since before I wore the tunic. He had physicked the late Queen Isolde through her last long illness, had sat with her, they said, through the nights no one else could bear, and after she died he had stayed on to care for the king, whose heart, since a bad winter fever 3 years past, had not been sound. Everyone in the household knew the shape of Master Call's evenings. Every day at dusk he climbed the inner stair with his worn leather roll and a small brown bottle of what he called heartsease, a tincture he measured by drops into a glass of watered wine, the same measure every night, because the king's laboring heart needed exactly that much and no more and no less to keep its rhythm. I had watched him do it 1,000 times. I had held the door for him 1,000 times. He was a fussy, dry, decent old man, and the king trusted him the way you trust a thing you have stopped noticing. And 9 days before that night on the stair, Master Call had been dismissed. It had happened quietly, the way things happen when someone wants them not to be remarked. There had been a matter of some missing medicines from the still room. A theft, it was said, a quantity of costly physic gone from the shelves, and Master Call, as the man who held the keys, was held to account. The Queen Consort had been much distressed by it. She was the one who had discovered the loss, she who had grieved that a man so long trusted could have fallen so low, she who had, with great reluctance and every appearance of sorrow, urged the king that a household could not keep a physician it could not trust with its own cupboards. Master Call had denied everything. It had done him no good. He was an old man with no family at court and no gift for defending himself, and he was gone within the week, and Sebastin Fen, a man the Queen Consort happened to know, a man of excellent smooth manners and a ready bottle, had stepped into his place. I had thought it a shame. I had thought it no business of mine. A guardsman does not have opinions about the king's physician. A guardsman opens the door. That is what I told myself for 9 days, and I might have gone on telling myself that until it killed the man I was sworn to keep, except that 3 nights before founding day, I watched the Queen Consort come down the inner stair in a traveling cloak at midnight, and let herself into the still room with a key she should not have had, and I found that I could not, after all, entirely stop noticing things. The next morning I did a small, dishonest thing, and I have never been sorry for it. When the day maid, Nessa, went into the still room to fetch the king's morning draught, I contrived to be at the door and I looked in. Nessa is a sharp girl and a kind one, and she has known me long enough not to ask why a stair guard wants to peer into a cupboard. On the shelf where the heartsease stood, there were now 2 small brown bottles instead of 1. They were near identical. But one had a plain wax seal, dark red, the color Master Call had always used. He sealed his own bottles. I had watched him do it. And the other had a seal of a lighter, brighter red, almost orange, a color I had never seen on that shelf in 9 years. That's the new stuff, Nessa said, following my eyes. Master Fen's. The doctor says the old bottle's near done and this is the fresh. She wrinkled her nose. Smells different, mind. The old drops smelled bitter like walnut skins. These don't smell of much at all. Smells different. I have turned that little phrase over more times than I can count. A physic that steadies a dying heart is not a thing that should smell of nothing. But I knew none of the science of it then. I only knew that a bottle had changed, and a physician had changed, and a wax seal had changed color, and a great lady had come down a midnight stair to a cupboard she had no cause to open. I knew the shape of a wrong thing without knowing its name. And I did nothing, because there was nothing a stair guard could do that would not end with a stair guard turned out of doors for insolence toward the Queen Consort. Who would I tell? The captain of the guard answered to the chamberlain, and the chamberlain, everyone knew, had grown very attentive to the Queen Consort's wishes of late. The physician who might have understood the drops had been thrown out as a thief. The king himself I could not reach. A guardsman does not request an audience to tell his sovereign that his wife's choice of medicine bottle has the wrong color wax. I would have been thought mad or malicious and rightly turned off, and then there would have been no one on the stair at all who was watching. So I kept my post and I kept my eyes and I waited, as a guardsman does, for the thing to show itself. It showed itself 2 days later on the balcony in front of the whole city, and it very nearly showed itself over the king's dead body. Founding Day is the oldest holiday in Eldermoor, older than the dynasty, older than Harrogate itself. On its morning the king stands on the great balcony above the forecourt and speaks to the city. A few words only, a blessing and a promise, the same shape of words every reign has spoken. The forecourt fills from dawn. There were thousands below us that morning, packed to the gilded railings, banners the deep green of Eldermoor hanging from every window, children up on shoulders, the whole bright noise of a people who have come to see the one man who is supposed to stand for all of them. It is a good day. It was the last good day for a long while. I was on the balcony detail, which I was not usually. The household guard rotates the ceremonial posts, but the captain had put me there, and I have thanked God for that assignment every year since. My place was at the king's left and a little behind, near the tall balcony doors, close enough to catch a falling man. I did not know yet that I would need to. The king came out to a roar. Alaric of Eldermoor was near 60 then, silver at the temples, a big deliberate man who had always seemed to me built for exactly this, for standing above a crowd and being steady while they cheered. But I had been watching the back of his head for 9 years, and I saw at once that something was wrong with the way he moved. He came out too carefully. He set his hand on the stone balustrade too soon, and left it there, and leaned on it in a way a strong man does not lean. His color, when he half turned to acknowledge the crown prince beside him, was bad gray under the flush the cold air gave him. I remember thinking, with a lurch under my ribs, that he had not looked like that a week ago, that he had been getting worse for days and no one had said, that a physician who was doing his work would not have let the king out onto that balcony at all. He began to speak. His voice, which could fill a hall, would not fill the forecourt that morning. It kept catching, thinning, and he kept stopping to breathe in a way that made the front ranks of the crowd go quiet and uncertain, sensing something without knowing what. He got through the blessing. He began the promise, the old line, the one every king says, "I hold this realm not for myself but for you and for those who come after." And on the word after his hand came off the balustrade and went to the center of his chest, and he stopped. I was moving before he fell. I had been leaning toward him for a full minute without knowing it. Every instinct I had wound tight, and when his knees went I had already crossed the space between us. I got an arm across his back and took his weight against my shoulder before he reached the stone. He was heavy, a big man gone suddenly boneless, and his breath was coming in short dragging pulls, and his lips had gone a color I do not like to remember, and his eyes found mine for one moment with an expression I have never been able to describe except to say that a king should never have to look at anyone that way, least of all a stair guard he has never once spoken to. "Down," I said to no one and everyone. "Get him down, get him inside." Then there were hands everywhere. The crown prince, Rowan, had his father's other side. He was a young man of 22, and he went white to the lips, but he did not falter. He took the weight and helped me turn the king back through the tall doors out of the sight of the city. Behind us the forecourt had begun to make a sound I had never heard a crowd make, a low rising moan of fear, thousands of people understanding all at once that the man who was supposed to be steady had fallen. We laid him on a couch in the withdrawing room behind the balcony. He was breathing but barely, and each breath cost him, and his hand was still fisted at his chest. Rowan was on his knees beside him saying, "Father, Father," in a voice that had gone very young. The chamberlain was shouting for the physician. Ladies were weeping. It was the particular chaos of a great household that has never once, in living memory, had to save a life. and does not know how. And Sebastian Fenn came into that chaos and did nothing. I watched him. I made myself watch him because some cold part of me had already begun to keep account. He came in unhurried with his little case, and he knelt by the king and took his wrist and made a show of gravity, and he said, I heard him say it in his smooth, grieved voice to the chamberlain and to the weeping court, His Majesty's heart has been failing for some time. I have done all that could be done. We must pray, and we must let him rest, and we must prepare ourselves. He did not send for anything. He did not do the thing I had watched Master Call do 1,000 times, measure the drops, get them into the king, steady the heart with the physic that kept it beating. He knelt there and folded his hands and told a room full of frightened people that the king was dying and there was nothing to be done. And the room, wanting to be told what to do, believed him. I stood at the door with my rifle I could not fire, and I understood, fully and finally and far too late, what I had been watching for 9 days. The physician had been changed so that the drops could be changed. The drops had been changed so that the king's heart would fail. And now the man who had changed them knelt at the king's side and pronounced the failure natural. And no one in that room but me knew that a bottle of the wrong color had been sitting on a shelf for 9 days, and that a great lady had gone down a midnight stair to fetch it. I looked for her then. It took me a moment to find her in the press of the room. Queen Consort Morwenna stood a little apart, near the cold hearth, with one hand at her throat and her face composed into a perfect grief, and she was watching Fenn, and she was watching the king, and there was not one thing wrong with her performance that any soul in that room could have named. But I had seen her check on a dark stair. I had seen the exact half-instant when a person's real self shows before the mask comes down. And as I looked at her across that ruined morning, I saw her eyes move to me, to the stair guard by the door, the fixture, the part of the wall, and I saw her recognize me. She knew where she had last seen my face, and I watched her understand that I knew where I had last seen hers. Neither of us said anything. There was nothing to say yet, but the whole of what came after was decided in that look, in that silent room, over the body of a man neither of us was sure would live to see the evening. I made myself a promise standing in that doorway. I did not know if the king would die. I did not know if I could prove a single thing I believed. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew there was no longer any question of keeping my silence to keep my post. I would keep my eyes, and then I would find someone who would listen, and I would tell them exactly, precisely, provably what a wax seal the wrong color had cost the kingdom of Eldermoor. And if the king died before I could, then I would tell it over his grave and let them turn me off for it and be glad. That was the promise. Keeping it took everything I had, and it took the help of people I had never thought to count on, and it very nearly failed. Here is how it went. The king did not die that morning, though it was a near thing, and I will tell you now the small piece of luck that saved him, because it matters to everything after. The crown prince saved him, not Fenn, not the court, not the physic, Rowan. When Fenn folded his hands and told the room to prepare itself, most of the room accepted it, because it is a strange comfort to be told that a terrible thing is inevitable. It lets you weep instead of act. But Rowan was 22 and he loved his father, and he was not yet old enough to have learned that great men are supposed to defer to physicians. He looked at Fenn's folded hands and something in him refused them. No, he said. No, where is Master Call? Where is Master Call? He kept my father's heart for 3 years. Get him. Someone get Master Call. Fenn said, in his gentle voice, that Master Call had been dismissed, that there was no help there, that the old man was likely far from the city by now. And here is the luck. Master Call was not far from the city. He was in a lodging house down in the Candlewrights district, 3 streets from the palace wall, because he was 70 years old and had nowhere else to go, and had been quietly hoping, I think, that the household would find him innocent and call him back. I did not know that then, but Nessa knew, Nessa the day maid, who had wept when the old man was turned off and had carried word to him twice since, out of pity. Nessa was in the withdrawing room among the maids, and when she heard the prince cry out for call, she pushed through the skirts and the shouting, and she said, "I know where he is, Highness. I can bring him inside the hour. I will love that girl to the end of my life for it." Finn tried to stop it. He said it was too late, that moving the king, that disturbing the king, that false hope was a cruelty. He had a soft, reasonable objection ready for every second, and I watched him spend them, and I understood that every objection was a minute, and that this man wanted the king to have no more minutes. It was the Queen Consort who ended it, oddly or not oddly, once you understand her. She saw the whole room turning toward the prince's hope, and she was far too clever to be seen standing against a drowning family's prayer. So she turned it to Grace. She laid her hand on Rowan's arm and said, in a voice pitched to be overheard, "Of course, dear heart, send for the old man, send for anyone. We will leave nothing untried." And by seeming to grant the thing she could not prevent, she kept her mask on. I marked that too. She was never better than when she was cornered. It made her more dangerous, not less. Nessa ran. She brought Master Call up the servant's way within the half-hour, breathless, coatless, with his worn leather roll clutched to his chest, and the old man took one look at the king and one look at the glass on the side table, and he went very still and very fast at the same time, the way a competent man does in a room full of frightened ones. I was near enough to hear what he said to the prince low. How long since his drops, his true drops, the heartsease, the bitter ones? When did he last have the right measure? Rowan did not know. No one knew. Fenn, from across the room, said smoothly that His Majesty had been dosed each evening as always. Master Call picked up the small brown bottle from the king's side table, the one with the bright, wrong seal, and he broke the wax with his thumbnail and he smelled it, and I watched his old face change. He did not accuse anyone. He was far too frightened for the king to waste breath on accusation. But he said, half to himself, in a voice I happened to be close enough to catch, "This is not heartsease. There is no heartsease in this at all." And then he was moving, calling for hot water and for his own roll unwrapped, hunting through his little glass vials for the true tincture he still carried. And I understood that whatever the king had been given for 9 days, it had not been his medicine, that he had been in effect unphysicked for over a week, while everyone believed him cared for, his laboring heart left to labor alone until the strain of the balcony very nearly stopped it for good. Call got the true drops into him. It is not a dramatic thing to watch, a man being saved by 7 drops of bitter tincture in watered wine. There is no flash to it, no miracle you could point at. But over the next hour the gray went out of the king's face by degrees, and his breathing lengthened, and the terrible fist of his hand at his chest loosened, and near noon he opened his eyes and knew his son, and the withdrawing room, which had been a deathbed, became merely a sick room. A great cry went up in the forecourt when the word was carried down that the king lived. I heard it come up through the stone like a tide turning. He lived, and everything I did afterward I did knowing it, knowing there was still a man to protect, and not only a wrong to avenge. A murder you carry as grief. An attempt that has not yet finished you carry as a duty, because the person who wanted a man dead does not stop wanting it merely because the first attempt failed. And she did not stop. That is what I understood as I stood outside the sickroom door through that long afternoon. I watched the Queen Consort establish herself as the anguished wife who would not leave his side. I watched her be gracious to Master Call, reinstating the very man she had thrown out as a thief, with tears in her eyes, saying how wrong she had been, how she had let a household matter blind her, how nothing mattered now but the king. It was flawless. And I watched Sebastian Fenn quietly not be dismissed, kept on in the confusion as a second physician, so that he was still in the household, still near the still room, still near the king. She had failed to kill him with the drops, but she had not been caught. And a woman who has schemed her way to within one balcony of a crown does not, when the balcony fails, give up the crown. She adjusts. I did not yet know how she would adjust. I only knew she would, and that the king was still in the house with her, and that I was the only person in Harrogate who had seen the shape of the whole thing and lived to be part of the wall. So I did the only thing a man in my position could do. I began, very quietly, to build a case out of the small true things I could reach, because I had learned, watching her work, that against a person that's skilled you cannot win with what you believe. You can only win with what you can prove, laid out so plainly that even a court in love with her cannot look away. I started with Nessa, because she had already shown me her heart, and because a stair guard cannot go about the household asking questions, but a stair guard and a day maid can talk in a doorway without anyone thinking twice. I found her that evening carrying linen down the servants' stair, and I fell in beside her, and I asked her plainly to tell me everything she could remember about the day the medicines were said to be stolen, the day that got Master Call turned off. She thought about it as we walked. "It was odd, now you make me look at it," she said slowly. "The loss was found in the morning, a whole shelf of costly physic gone, and Master Call white as paper because he swore he'd locked the room himself. But the thing is," she stopped on the stair. "The thing is, it was her Grace who found it. She'd gone down to the still room herself first thing, which she never did, and she came out crying theft. And by noon Master Fenn was there with fresh supplies to replace all that was lost, ready to hand, as if he'd known just what would be wanted." She frowned. "I thought at the time how kind, how quick. But you don't have a cart of physic ready by noon for a theft you learned of at dawn. You have it ready when you know the theft is coming." "Where are the keys to the still room now?" I asked her. "Her Grace holds a set. She had them cut," she said, "so the household need never again be left without physic in a crisis." Nessa looked at me, and her sharp, kind face was frightened because she had just heard herself say it out loud. "Wystan, what are we talking about?" I did not tell her yet. I did not want to put more into her than she could safely carry, and I did not want her to be afraid in a way that showed. I said only, "We're talking about keeping the king alive. Will you help me?" She said yes without asking a second question, which is the measure of her, and which meant that from that night I was no longer the only one watching. I had 2 pairs of eyes. Soon I would have more. But I wanted set down that in the beginning it was a stair guard and a maid, and nothing else, standing between a king and the woman who slept beside him. The next morning I found my way to Master Call. He had been given a small room near the sick room so that he could be near the king at all hours, and I contrived to be the guard who walked the passage outside it. And when he came out gray with a knight's watching, I asked him, respectfully, whether an old soldier might have a private word about the king's health, for his own peace of mind. He looked at me the way the learned look at the uninformed, kindly and a little tired, and he might have sent me off with a soft word except that I said the thing I had been saving. I said, "Master Call, the night before you were dismissed, did you seal a fresh bottle of Heartsease and leave it on the shelf?" He stopped. "I did, I sealed it myself, dark red wax, my own stamp." His eyes sharpened on me. "Why do you ask a thing like that?" "Because for the 9 days you were gone," I said, "the bottle on that shelf had a seal of a different color, bright red near orange, and the drops in it smelled of nothing, where yours smelled of walnut skins. I have rarely seen a man age and wake up at once, but Master Call did it standing in that passage. He took my arm, his hand was cold and it shook, and he drew me into the little room and shut the door, and he said, low and urgent, "Guardsman, do you understand what you are telling me? The Heartsease is foxglove distilled and measured. In the right dose it steadies a failing heart. In no dose at all, a heart like His Majesty's fails within days under any strain. And a bottle that smells of nothing is a bottle with no foxglove in it, a bottle of colored cordial, dressed to look like physic." He sat down heavily on the cot. For 9 days the king was given nothing. Everyone believed he was being dosed each dusk, and each dusk he was given a spoon of sweetened water and left to die of a strain his heart could no longer carry. And on Founding Day, the greatest strain of his year, it very nearly did. It would have been called a natural death. A weak heart at last given out. No physician could have proved otherwise, not once the true bottle was gone and the false one thrown on the fire. He looked up at me. "How is it that you know the color of the wax?" "Because I stand on the stair," I said, "and I watched the Queen Consort go into the still room at midnight 3 days ago with the apothecary Fen, and let herself out with a key, and the next morning there were 2 bottles on the shelf where there had always been one, and one of them was wrong." For a long moment the old man said nothing. Then he did a thing that shamed me a little, because I had thought physicians were made of dry stuff. He wept a few hard tears, quickly mastered. "They said I was a thief," he said. "They turned me out and said I had stolen from the king I gave 40 years to. And it was done so that no one who knew the smell of the right physic would be in the room when the wrong one killed him." He wiped his face with the back of his hand. "What do you want of me, guardsman?" "I want you to keep the king alive," I said, "and I want you to help me prove it so plainly that it cannot be talked away, because she has not stopped. She is still in the house." He understood at once. He was an intelligent man, and once you have seen the frame of a thing it cannot be unseen. "Then we must be careful about 2 matters," he said. "First, the king must never again take a drop of anything but what comes from my own roll, sealed by my own hand and carried by a person I trust from the moment it is measured to the moment it touches his lips. If a bottle sits unwatched even a moment, it can be changed, and next time she will not use nothing, she will use too much, and an overdose of foxglove stops a heart as surely as none at all and looks even more like nature." It chilled me more than any wild talk could have, because he was a physician stating a fact. "Second, evidence. The false bottle from the balcony. I broke its seal and smelled it and know it for a fraud, but my word is one physician's word, and I was lately cried a thief. We need the thing itself, kept safe, and someone whose word cannot be waved aside." The false bottle. In the chaos of the sick room it had been left on the side table, and I had, out of the same instinct that made me look at the shelf, kept my eye on it. And when the room emptied at midday, I had taken it and stoppered it and put it inside my tunic against my ribs, where it had been ever since. I gave it to Master Call now. He held it up to the window and looked at the color of the liquid and the color of the wax, and he wrapped it in a clean cloth and hid it inside his roll, among his own vials, the one place in Harrogate no one would think to search a used bottle among 100 others. "This is the king's life and her ruin, both in one small glass," he said. "Guard it better than your own." We were 2 now and then 3, and the shape of what we were doing had a name I did not like to say even to myself. We were a stair guard, a maid, and a disgraced old doctor, conspiring in secret inside the palace to protect the king from the queen. Put like that, it sounds like the very sort of thing loyal men are hanged for. I was aware of the danger. I was more aware every hour of the man in the sick room, and of the fact that if we did nothing and were prudent, he would surely die. Because she began again within the week, just as Master Call had said she would. The king mended slowly. By the 4th day he could sit up and take broth. By the 6th he could hold a short conversation before it tired him. And as he mended, the household began to breathe again, and the watchfulness that a crisis brings began to slacken, which was exactly the water the Queen Consort swam best in. She was tireless in her devotion now. She sat with him. She read to him. She fussed over his comfort, his warmth, his rest, and above all, and this is the thing, over his medicine. She had appointed herself in her grief and love the keeper of his care. And she made it known, gently everywhere, that the king's illness had shown how fragile he was, how his mind wandered when he was tired, how he must be spared every burden of state until he was strong, and how fortunate it was that there were those who loved him ready to carry those burdens for him. I heard the word for the first time from the chamberlain's own clerk, spoken low in a corridor as a thing already half decided. Regency. If the king could not rule while he recovered, and perhaps, the whisper went, given his heart, he would never fully recover, then the burdens of the crown must rest with a Council of Regency. And who would sit at the head of such a council but the king's devoted wife, and at her right hand her son, the clever and capable Lord Cassius, who had lately made himself so very useful in the smooth running of the household. That was the adjustment. I understood it the moment I heard the word. She had failed to make the king dead. So she would make him incapable, declared too weak to rule, set gently aside, kept comfortable and quiet in his apartments with his devoted wife controlling every soul who came near him and every drop he swallowed. And once she held the regency, once she controlled the king's person and the king's medicine both, there would be all the time in the world for his weak heart to have its natural, unhurried, unwitnessed end. She did not need him to die today. She needed only to own the room he died in. The crown prince stood in her way, of course. Rowan was the heir. A grown heir does not need a regent. But Rowan was 22 and grief-shaken and untried, and the whisper had an answer for him too, that a young man so distraught, so lately unmanned by his father's collapse, could hardly be expected to bear the crown's weight alone, and would surely be grateful for the guidance of his stepmother and her steady son through so hard a season. It was all wrapped in love. Every blade of it was wrapped in love. That was what made it nearly impossible to fight. I saw then that I could not simply wait to catch her at a second bottle. By the time she reached for one, she might already hold the regency, and then no evidence I brought would matter, for the court that judged it would be her court. I had to move first. I had to get the truth I held in front of someone, with the standing to act on it, before the Council of Regency was called. There was exactly one such person in the kingdom who was not already inside the Queen Consort's reach, the king's own sister, Princess Adela. Adela was older than Alaric by 2 years, and where he was warm she was flint. She had never married. She kept a small, austere household in the dower wing and a great deal of her own counsel, and she had disliked Morwenna from the first day the woman entered Harrowgate, not for any reason she ever gave, but with the settled, unhurried dislike of a person who has watched a great many people and knows the difference between warmth and the imitation of it. Morwenna had been careful with her always. You do not scheme against a king with his sister standing at your elbow, and so, over 4 years, the Queen Consort had quietly, courteously, arranged for Princess Adela to be at her elbow as little as possible, kept off councils, sent to open distant assizes and bless distant harvests, honored into irrelevance. On the day of the balcony she had been 3 days' ride away, dedicating a hospital in the Northern March. She had come back the moment the news reached her, riding through a night and a day, and she had arrived to find her brother alive but abed, and a regency being whispered into being around him, and herself, once again, on the outside of every room where it mattered. She was, in short, exactly the ally I needed, powerful enough to be heard and angry enough to listen. The difficulty was reaching her. A stair guard does not request an audience with a princess of the blood, and the Queen Consort's people watched the dower wing with the same soft attention they gave everything now. If I were seen to seek out Adela, and the reason guessed, the one door left open would be shut. It was Nessa again who found the way. The princess's linen was laundered with the households, and the girl who carried it up to the dower wing had taken sick, and Nessa, who by now understood exactly how much a small, ordinary errand can carry, offered to take it in her place, and tucked among the folded sheets she carried a single sheet of paper in my hand. I had written it plainly, in the flat words of a man making a report, because I judged that a princess of Adela's temper would trust a plain report where she would distrust anything that pleaded. I set down what I had seen on the stair, the 2 bottles, the color of the wax, the smell Nessa marked, the timing of the theft that removed Master Call, the false bottle now in Call's keeping, and Call's word as a physician that the balcony bottle held no physic at all. I did not tell her what to conclude. I laid the small true things in a row and let her be the one to see the line they made. And I ended it. I am the king's man, and I will say all of this to his face or to a court, under oath, and answer for it, whenever your highness commands. I signed my name and my post. For 2 days nothing came back, and they were the longest 2 days of my life, because I did not know whether I had put the truth into the hands of the one person who could use it, or handed a princess who half-liked the queen a confession of treasonous slander against her brother's wife. I stood my posts. I watched the king mend and the regency ripen. I watched Morwenna carry the king's evening cup up the inner stair with her own hands now, a wife's tender office, and no one but Call and Nessa and I to know that a wife's tender hands were the last hands anyone should want near the king's cup. Call had held to his rule. The king took nothing but what Call measured and sealed, and a trusted man carried. But the trusted men were few, and the queen's watchfulness was patient, and I understood that our guard could not hold forever against a person who lived in the same apartments and had all the time in the world. On the third day, a summons came for me, an ordinary one, on its face. Princess Adela was reviewing the Dower Wing Guard, and had asked that a household man of long service attend her to speak to the standing of the posts. It was the sort of dull, administrative thing a princess might do and a guardsman might be called to, and it drew no eye. I went up. I was shown into a plain, cold room with a single fire, and the princess sent her people out, and when the door was shut she looked at me for a while without speaking, taking my measure the way her family took the measure of everything. Then she said, "You understand that if one word of what you have written to me is untrue or cannot be shown, I will not be able to save you, and that even if all of it is true, I may not be able to save you, because the woman you are accusing is at this hour one vote from ruling this kingdom." "I understand it, Highness. Why did you not simply hold your peace? A wise guardsman sees the wax and forgets the wax. You would have kept your post and your neck." "I stood the stair 9 years, Highness," I said. "The king never spoke to me in all that time." "He did not need to. I gave him my word when I took the tunic that I would keep him, and a word does not stop meaning anything because the man never noticed you gave it. He nearly died 4 paces from me, and I could have stopped it and did not, because I told myself it was not my place. I will not tell myself that twice." She was quiet again. Then for the first time something moved in the flint of her. "No," she said, "I don't believe you will." She rose and stood at the fire with her back to me. "I have distrusted that woman for 4 years and been able to lay my hand on nothing but my own dislike, which is worth precisely as much as anyone's dislike, nothing. You have brought me the first thing in 4 years that is not a feeling, a bottle, a color, a smell. A dismissed physician who can name the poison by its absence." She turned. "It is not enough. Do you know why it is not enough? Because it is our word, Highness, and she is the queen. Because it is your word, and a maid's, and a thief's. For that is what the court still calls call against the king's grieving wife, at a moment when the king himself is too weak and too fond to believe ill of her, and when the men who would judge it are the men she has spent 4 years placing. If you stand up tomorrow and say all of it, she will weep, and Fen will swear the bottle is a wicked forgery you smuggled in yourself to destroy her, and the false bottle in Call's roll will be called a thing Call brewed to clear his own name, and you and the maid and the old man will be broken, and she will have her regency the sweeter for having survived a slander. Truth is not enough, guardsmen. Truth that cannot be forced into the open in front of witnesses who cannot deny it, that is just another way of being right while a man dies." She came close. "So we are not going to accuse her. We are going to make her show us. And for that I need 3 things you do not yet have." That was the midpoint of it, if a life can be said to have a midpoint. The moment the thing stopped being a secret I carried and became a plan 2 of us were making. And what Adela laid out was harder and colder and far cleverer than anything a stair guard would have dared, and it is the reason we won. "First," she said, "the apothecary Fen. He is the weak stone. Your queen is iron, she will never break and never confess and never leave a mark. But Fen is a bought man, and a bought man serves his own skin before any mistress. He mixed the false physic. He knows where the true bottle went and who paid for the false. If he can be brought to believe that the scheme is unraveling and that he alone will hang for it while she walks free, because she will let him hang, and he must be made to see that she will, then he will trade her for his neck. Men like Fen always do. Your work is to watch him and to find me the thread of his fear. Second, the still room. She had the keys cut and she has been careless in her confidence, for no one has ever dared question her. A scheme leaves paper. It always leaves paper because even schemers must count their costs. Find it or find who keeps it. Third and hardest, she looked at me steadily. We will not move until we can make her act in front of the king's own eyes and witnesses she cannot own, and we will not have long, because the Council of Regency is called for 8 days from now. If we move too soon and fall short, we lose worse than by waiting. So we prepare in silence, and we spring it at the council itself, the one room where she and the king and enough lords must all be present that she cannot smother it. 8 days, guardsman. Can you do your part? I can try, Highness. You will do better than try, she said, or my brother dies of his weak heart within the year, and history calls it sad and calls her devoted. Go. I went, and for 8 days I did the hardest work I have ever done, which was to stand my posts exactly as always, sleep when I could, betray nothing in my face, and in the seams of it hunt a frightened man and a hidden paper, while the woman I hunted carried her husband's cup up my stair every dusk with her own 2 hands. The work went well at first. That was the trouble. It went well enough to make me believe for a day and a half that we had already won, and that was the false dawn, and it very nearly finished us. Fen's fear was not hard to find, because Fen was a man made mostly of it. I watched him for 3 days and saw a person who had done a terrible thing for money, and had not the stomach he had thought he had for living inside it. He drank. He slept badly. I saw him gray in the mornings. He flinched when the Queen Consort's people came near him, which told me he no longer trusted his own mistress. And on the 3rd night, watching the still room from the dark of the stair, I saw the thread Adela had told me to find. Fen came down alone, well after midnight, and let himself into the still room, and came out some minutes later tucking something into his coat, and his face, when a torch caught it on the low turn, was the face of a man taking out an insurance against his own hanging. He had kept something. Of course he had. A bought man who fears his mistress keeps proof, because proof is the only coin that buys his life if the day goes wrong. I did not know yet what it was. But I knew he had it, and I knew where he slept, and I carried that to Adela, and she smiled a thin, cold smile and said, "There, that is the thread. Now we pull it gently, so he runs the way we want and not the wrong way." But the Queen Consort pulled first. I have thought since that she must have felt it, not known it, not seen a single thread of what we did, but felt the change in the water the way a fish feels a net it cannot see. She was that sort of creature. Or perhaps she simply reached the same conclusion Adela had reached, from the other side, that Fen was the weak stone, that a frightened bought man is a danger to the one who bought him, and that with a regency 6 days away she could not afford a physician who drank and slept badly and flinched. Whatever the reason, on the morning after I found Fen's thread, the household woke to grief a second time, a smaller grief, a servant's grief, but grief. Sebastin Fen had been found dead in his bed. An overtaxed heart, the word went round. He had worked himself past his strength caring for the king. He had a weakness of the heart himself, poor man, and it had taken him in the night, as such things do. There was much gentle sorrow. The Queen Consort was said to have wept for him. And I stood on my stair and felt the floor of our plan drop away, because our weak stone, the one soul who could have named her from inside the scheme, was dead of a weak heart, dead of exactly the death she had prepared for the king, tidy and natural and unprovable. She had killed her own man to close the mouth we meant to open. And she had done it, I understood, with a cold that went to the bone, without hurry and without fear, because she was better at this than we were, and she had been at it longer, and she did not make mistakes when she was cornered, she made corpses. I went to Adela sick with it. I thought we were finished. 6 days to the council, our one witness in his grave, and nothing left but a bottle, a color, and a smell, exactly the not enough she had warned me of. She has beaten us, I said. Fen is dead. There's no one left who was inside it. Adela heard me out, and she did not flinch, and when I was done she said something I have kept ever since. You are grieving a plan, Guardsman. Grieve it quickly and stop. She has just made 2 mistakes and you are too shaken to see them. She held up one finger. First, she has told me by killing him that Fen had something worth killing for. A man you have already bought and silenced with money you do not murder, not with a regency 6 days off and every risk that a death brings. You murder a man who is about to become proof against you. She has confirmed the thing exists. A second finger. Second, the thing itself did not die with him. You saw him take something from the still room and hide it in his coat, against exactly this day, against the day his mistress turned on him. A frightened man's insurance is not kept in his coat, Guardsman, where it burns with him. It is hidden. And now the man who hid it is dead and cannot move it or destroy it or warn her where it lies. She has closed his mouth, but she has not found his hand. Somewhere in this palace is the thing Sebastian Fen hid to save a life he no longer has, and it is ours to find if we are quick, and it will be the cleaner for having come from her own creature and not from us. It steadied me the way Call's drops steadied the king, not a miracle, just the right measure at the right moment. We were not finished. We had 4 days, a dead man's secret and a place to look, for a man hides his life's insurance where he can reach it fast and unwatched. It was in neither quite. It was in the wall between them. I searched his quarters the night after he was buried, while the household slept and Nessa kept the passage, and I found nothing, because the Queen Consort's people had been there before me and turned it out on the pretext of clearing a dead servant's things. But I knew Fen's habits by then. I had watched the man for a week, and I remembered that he went not to his room after his midnight visit to the still room but to the low turn of the stair, the very turn where I stood my post and lingered there a moment each time as if resting. There is a loose stone on the low turn. Every guard who has ever stood that post knows it. It rocks under your heel and you learn to step past it. I had stepped past it 1,000 nights. I had never once thought to lift it. Behind it, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a small book and 2 sealed bottles. The book was Fen's own reckoning, an apothecary's habit, to write down what he mixed and what he was paid, because a man who deals in physic must keep his measures straight or kill by accident. He had kept it against his mistress the way Adela said such men do, and he had written more than measures. He had written the dates. He had written the sums, and the hand that paid them, her Grace's steward by name, on her Grace's word. He had written in the flat shorthand of his trade the making of a tincture with the color and smell of heartsease and none of its virtue, and beside it, in plainer words on a day he must have been drinking, a line that has been read aloud in more than one grave chamber since. God forgive me, it is meant to look like his heart, and I am to say it was his heart. And the 2 bottles, one sealed in dark red wax with Master Call's own honest stamp, the true heartsease, the king's real physic, stolen from the shelf the night Call was cried a thief and hidden by the man who stole it, kept 9 days while the king was given nothing, and one in the bright wrong red, a second false bottle, mixed and ready, waiting for the day the Queen Consort would need it again. I sat on the cold stair with a dead man's oiled bundle in my hands, and I understood that I was holding the whole of it, not our word against hers, her own creature's hand, her steward's name, her false bottle and the king's true one, and a line begging God's forgiveness for a murder dressed as a weak heart. It was not enough to accuse her, Adela had said. This was not an accusation. This was the thing itself. I took it to the princess before dawn, and for the first time in 8 days I saw her truly smile, not the thin, cold court smile, but something with teeth in it, a fierce, plain gladness. There, she said softly, turning the little book in her hands. There she is. Then the flint came back. Now, the council sits in 3 days, we have the proof. But proof read out by a princess who has always hated her, and a stair guard and a disgraced physician, in a room she has spent 4 years arranging, she will still have an answer. She will say we forged it. She will weep and Fen will be past denying it for her, and she will make his silence into her innocence. So we will not read it out. She set the book down. We will make her reach for the bottle in front of them all. with her own hand, and then there will be no answer left to give. The plan she laid out over those last 3 days was the coldest and finest thing I have ever been part of, and I will tell it as it happened rather than as she designed it, because in the room it did not go quite as designed. Such things never do, and the difference is the whole point. Here was the frame of it. The Council of Regency would sit in the painted hall, the king present but seated and weak, the lords assembled, the Queen Consort at the center of the very thing she had built toward. Adela would ensure the king was well enough to attend and to understand. Call would see to his strength, and she would ensure that a particular question came before the council early, the question of the king's medicine. For the whole justification of the regency rested on the king being too frail to be trusted with his own person, and Adela would turn that against its maker. She would propose in open council that so precious a thing as the king's daily physic must no longer rest with any single person, however loving, that it must be kept under seal, witnessed, and its keeping given publicly before them all into named hands. She would propose that the true bottle of heartsease be brought out and shown to the council and formally entrusted. And then she would have it brought out, the real one, Call's dark-sealed bottle, recovered from behind the loose stone, the king's own true physic that the Queen Consort believed had been destroyed 9 days after it was stolen. She would set it on the table in front of the whole council, name it for what it was, and ask the Queen Consort, the devoted keeper of the king's care, to take it up and confirm it as the king's medicine, so that the council might see her entrust it. She believes that bottle burned, Adela said. She has never seen it since the night her creature stole it. When it appears on that table whole, sealed in Call's honest wax, she will know in one instant that everything she thought was ash is alive, that Fenn's hand survived him, that the true physic survived, that someone has been inside her scheme and pulled it out whole. And a person is never so honest as in the half-second when the ground opens. Watch her face, guardsman. You have seen her check on a dark stair. You will see her check again, and this time the whole council will see it with you. And more, she will reach for that bottle. She will have to. Because the one thing she cannot allow, the one thing her whole scheme cannot survive, is that bottle being opened and smelled and known, the true heartsease beside the false, proving there were two, proving the swap, proving everything. She will reach to take it up and put it away and control it, the way she has controlled every dangerous thing for 4 years. And the moment she reaches for a bottle she has just been told is the king's true medicine, the medicine everyone believes he has been faithfully given, she confesses that she knows it is not what he has been given. An innocent keeper reaches without fear. Only the poisoner lunges for the proof. I said it was very fine and very cold, and asked what would happen if she did not reach, if she were iron enough even for that. Then we read out the book, Adela said, and show the 2 bottles and call it proof, and it will very likely still be enough, now that Fenn is dead and cannot recant and the king is well enough to weigh it himself. The reach is not our only arrow, it is the cleanest one, but listen to me, guardsman, for this is your part and it is the whole of it. She looked at me the way she had looked at me in the cold room, taking my measure and this time trusting it. You will be in that hall. Not as a witness called, she would see a witness coming and arm herself. You will be there as what you have always been. A guard on the wall, the king's stairman standing his post part of the room, and when the bottle is set down and she reaches, or when she does not reach and instead begins as she will to weep and to turn it to make the room pity her and doubt us, you will be the one who speaks. Not I, not Call, you. Because you are the man who saw it from the first night on the stair with your own eyes, asking nothing, gaining nothing, sworn to no one but him. When the stair guard, who has never spoken to the king in 9 years, stands up in the painted hall and tells them, plainly, what he watched, that is the thing she cannot forge or weep or wave away. The lords will believe a great many lies from people who want things. They will believe the truth from a man who wants nothing. That is your part, can you stand it? I said that I had stood worse for less, and she almost laughed, and we went to make the king strong enough to watch his wife reach for a bottle. The painted hall on the morning of the council was full to its gilded walls. Every lord of standing in Eldermoor had come, for a regency is the kind of thing men attend, so they can say afterward that they were there when it was decided. The king sat at the head of the long table in a great chair, wrapped against the cold, thinner than the city remembered him, but upright. And this was Call's doing and mine clear-eyed, for he had had his true drops that dawn, measured and sealed and carried by Nessa and taken under my own watching. And a man on his true physic is a different man from the fading one the regency was built to set aside. Beside him, at his right, sat the Queen Consort Morwenna, in dove-grey, the very picture of a wife who has watched at a sickbed and asks nothing but her husband's ease. Near her, her son Lord Cassius, composed and attentive, already carrying himself with the small extra straightness of a man who expects to be lifted. The Crown Prince Rowan sat at the king's left, and I saw that someone had told him something of what was coming, for he was pale and very still and kept his eyes down. Princess Adela sat among the council as one lord among many, having asked and been granted, as the king's sister, the right to speak to the matter of his care. I stood against the wall by the great doors, with 2 other guardsmen, part of the room. No one looked at me. I have never in my life worked so hard at being furniture. The council opened, and it went at first exactly as the Queen Consort had built it to go. The chamberlain spoke of the king's collapse and of his frailty and of the wisdom, he did not quite say necessity, but he let the room hear it, of a Council of Regency to carry the burdens of state while his Majesty recovered, a regency headed in loving hands by Her Grace the Queen Consort, assisted by Lord Cassius. It was all reason and love. Heads nodded. Morwenna sat with her eyes lowered, a woman too modest to want the thing being pressed upon her. I watched her be perfect, and I thought of Sebastin Fenn in his fresh grave, and of the king given sweetened water for 9 days while she carried his cup up my stair, and I held my post. Then Adela asked to speak, and the room, which knew she had cause to resent her exclusion, settled in to hear a bitter woman make a complaint. She surprised them. She did not attack the regency, she embraced its very premise. My brother's health, she said, is the whole ground of what we discuss. If he is too frail to be trusted with the burdens of the crown, then he is too frail to be trusted, above all, with the one thing his life hangs upon, his medicine. And yet how is that most precious thing kept? In the hands of one person, however loving, unwitnessed, unsealed, unaccountable to this council or to any soul. She let that sit. My lords, I say that whatever we decide of regencies, we must first decide this, that the king's physic shall be kept openly, under seal, in named and witnessed hands, so that never again can there be 9 days in which no man can swear what his Majesty was or was not given. I ask that his true medicine be brought before this council now, and shown and formally entrusted, so that we all become its keepers and no one is its master. It was beautifully done, because no one could argue it. To argue against the king's medicine being kept safely and openly was to argue for it being kept secretly and dangerously, and not even Morwenna could do that in open council. She lifted her head, and I saw her weigh it fast behind her calm, and I saw her decide that this was a small ground to yield, a matter of housekeeping, a sister's fussing, and that to fight it would draw more eyes than to grant it graciously. Her Highness speaks from love, she said, warm and clear, and I will not be behind her in it. Let it be brought. I have kept it as carefully as my own heart, and I will gladly share the keeping. She believed the bottle to be brought would be Fenn's, or a fresh one, or some ordinary thing. She did not yet understand what was coming across the room. Adela nodded to a steward at the side door, and it was not the steward who came forward. It was Master Alwyn Call, the disgraced physician, the cried thief, whom the whole hall believed dismissed and reinstated only as a sick-room nurse, walking the length of the painted hall with his worn leather roll in his hands, and he set it on the table before the king and unwrapped it, and from among his own honest vials he lifted out one small brown bottle sealed in dark red wax, and he set it upright in the center of the table where every lord and the king and the queen consort could see it. "The king's true heart sees," Call said in his dry, steady voice. "Sealed in my own wax by my own hand, the night before I was turned out of this house as a thief, stolen from the still room that same night not by me. Hidden 9 days, while His Majesty was given a false bottle that held no physic at all, and very nearly died of it on the balcony before the city. Recovered whole. Here it is." I was watching her face. Adela had told me to, and I would have anyway, for it was the whole of my 9 years come to a point, and I saw it. In the half-second before the mask could come down, the Queen Consort Morwenna looked at that dark red seal, the seal she believed had burned to ash 9 days and a lifetime ago, and everything went out of her face. Not fear, quite. Recognition. The look of a person who has felt the stair give way under a foot they were certain of. It lasted no longer than a breath. And then, exactly as Adela had foretold, her hand moved. Her own white hand came off her lap and reached across the table toward the bottle, to take it up, to hold it, to have it. Because the one thing her whole 4 years could not survive was that bottle standing on the table where it could be opened and smelled and known. "Give it to me," she said, and her voice was still almost perfect, only a hair too quick. "It should not be handled so, it must be kept safe. I will keep it." "Do not touch it, madam." It was my own voice, and it went down the painted hall like a dropped blade, and every head in the room turned to the wall by the great doors where a stair-guard had, against all the order of the world, spoken aloud in a council of the realm. I stepped from the wall. I do not remember deciding to. I remember only that her hand was reaching for the bottle, and that 9 years of standing still ended in that moment cleanly, like a held breath let go. "Forgive me, your majesty," I said to the king, because he was owed the words first. "I am Wystan Rooke. I have stood the inner stair 9 years. Your majesty has never had cause to know my name, but I have kept your door every night you have slept in these apartments, and I will tell this council what I saw with my own eyes, and answer for every word of it with my life if it is false." The king looked at me. Clear-eyed on his true physic, he looked at me as a man looks at a piece of his own house he has never truly seen, and he said quietly, "Say it, guardsman." So I said it. I said it plainly, the way I had written it to Adela, the way I had learned she trusted no pleading, no color, only the small true things laid in a row. The midnight on the stair, the traveling cloak, the queen consort and the apothecary Fenn letting themselves into the still room with a key. The 2 bottles the next morning where there had always been one, and the wrong bright wax, and the drops that smelled of nothing where the true drops smelled of walnut skins. The theft that removed the one physician who would have known the difference, discovered by her grace's own hand, replaced by noon with supplies too ready to be a surprise. The balcony and Fenn kneeling to pronounce a natural death and doing nothing to prevent it. The false bottle I had carried against my ribs and given to Master Call. And then, because it was time, the last of it. The loose stone on the low turn and the oiled bundle behind it, and what a dead man had hidden there against the day his mistress turned on him. His own reckoning book in his own hand, with her grace's steward named and her grace's word recorded, and beside the making of a false physic the line, "God forgive me," it is meant to look like his heart, and I am to say it was his heart. And the king's true bottle, stolen and hidden and now standing on the table, and the second false bottle mixed and waiting for the next time. Master Call laid the book and the second bottle on the table beside the first as I spoke, and the painted hall, which had come to ratify a regency, understood by degrees what it was truly witnessing, and a sound went through it that I will not try to describe except to say that it was the sound of a great many powerful men realizing at once that they had very nearly been made the instruments of a murder. Through all of it, the Queen Consort's hand was still half-reached across the table toward the bottle, arrested where my voice had stopped it, and it was that, more than the book, more than my words, that damned her in the eyes of the room. For every lord there had heard Call name the bottle the king's true medicine, the medicine His Majesty was believed to have faithfully received. And they had all watched the devoted wife, the tender keeper of his care, lunge to seize and hide it the instant it appeared. An innocent keeper has no reason on earth to fear her husband's own medicine. Only one person in that hall had a reason to want that bottle gone before it could be opened, and she had shown them her reason with her own hand in front of them all, exactly as Adela had said she would. She knew it too. She was far too clever not to know it. I watched her draw her hand back slowly, and fold it with the other in her lap and lift her chin and reach. I saw her reach for the weeping, for the turning, for the innocence through grief that had carried her through every hard corner for 4 years. "This is a wicked thing," she began, and her voice shook exactly as much as a wronged woman should. "A stair guard and a thief and a jealous sister have." Morwenna. It was the king. He said her name once quietly and she stopped, because there are some voices even the iron-hearted cannot talk over, and a king on his feet in his own hall is one of them. He was on his feet. I do not know how he found the strength. Call told me after that he should not have risen at all. But he rose, gripping the table, and he looked at his wife across the king's true medicine and the dead man's book and the second bottle mixed for his death, and his face was not angry. That was the terrible thing. It was only sad and very tired, and finally, after 4 years, awake. "I gave you my hand," he said. "I gave you my house and my children's table and every trust a man has to give, and you gave the apothecary a key to the room where my life was kept." He looked down at the 2 bottles, the honest wax and the false, side by side. 9 days, he said. "I stood on that balcony in front of my city and I felt my heart stop and I thought, God forgive me, I thought it was only that I was old, and you sat by my bed and carried my cup and let me think it." He did not raise his voice at all. "Take your hand from anything of mine. You will not touch the medicine, nor the children, nor the cup, nor the crown you nearly widowed yourself to wear. It is finished." That was the reckoning. Not a shout, not a blow, a quiet old man on his feet telling the truth at last, and a hall of witnesses who could no longer unsee it, and a bottle of dark red wax standing on a table where it had no business surviving to stand. What followed I will tell quickly, for the heat of the thing was over and only its settling remained. There was no regency. The council that had assembled to hand the kingdom's care to the Queen Consort instead assembled, over the following days, to unmake her. Fenn's book was examined by men who knew an apothecary's hand and found true. The 2 bottles were opened and smelled and tested, the honest heartsease bitter as walnut skins, the false one sweet and empty. The steward Fenn had named was questioned, and seeing which way the wind had turned, gave up the rest of it to save his own neck. The moneys, the errands, the key that had been cut, the whole quiet machinery of it. It came out that the theft that ruined Master Call had been arranged to remove the one man who would have smelled the fraud. There was no single moment when the court decided. There was only the slow turning of a great many people who had admired her, each in his own time, to look at what she had done, and to be unable, once they had looked, to look away. The king did not have her killed. A lesser injured man might have and been within his right, but Alaric of Eldermoor had been made sad rather than cruel by it, and he was mindful, too, of the children. For whatever she was mother to Cassius and Verena, and there was no sense punishing a whole house for the crime of one heart. She was stripped of her title and her place and her seals, and sent from Harrowgate under guard to a cold small holding in the far north, the same distant march to which she had once so cleverly exiled the king's sister, to live out her years in the quiet she had prepared for others. She went, they tell me, without a tear once the weeping had stopped serving her, iron to the last. Lord Cassius, who had reached for a place he had not earned but could not be shown to have known the worst of his mother's work, kept his life and his name and left the court quietly. Lady Verena, who had, it emerged, tried more than once to turn her mother from the darkest road and been shut out of it, stayed and grieved honestly, and the king in his mercy let her. She had done no wrong but be born to the wrong parent, and that is no crime a just house punishes. Master Alwyn Call was restored to his place and his honor, and more than restored. The king had it read in open court that the man-cried thief had been the truest servant in the house, and the old physician, who had wept when they broke him, wept again when they mended him, which I understood better now than I once would have. He kept the king's heart another 6 years, and steadied it every dusk with drops measured and sealed and witnessed, in named and open hands, exactly as Princess Adela had wanted in the council. For that one piece of housekeeping she had used as her weapon became, after, the settled law of the king's care, and no man's medicine in Harrowgate has since been kept in secret hands. Nessa the day-maid was raised to the king's own household and given charge fittingly of the very still-room, and there was no keener keeper of a locked door in the kingdom, for she knew, better than most, what it costs when the wrong hand holds the key. Princess Adela took her rightful place at the king's council and was never again honored into irrelevance. Her brother, who had learned in the hardest school what her flint was worth, kept her close the rest of his reign. And the Crown Prince Rowan, who had, in the one moment it mattered most, refused a smooth physician's folded hands and cried out for the old man who could save his father, grew into the king men had glimpsed in him that day. And when Alaric at last died, 6 good years on, of a heart worn honestly out and steadied to the very end, it was a peaceful thing in a warm bed with his son's hand in his, and no bottle in the kingdom the wrong color. As for me, the king learned my name that day in the painted hall, and he did not forget it. He sent for me when he was strong enough, and he did a thing I have never quite known how to carry, which is that a king rose from his chair, Call scolding him for it, and took a stair guard's hand in both of his and thanked him for his life. He offered me advancement, a captaincy, a place of honor, my choice of posts, and I asked him. It surprised him, I think, to be left on the inner stair. He asked me why. I told him the truth, which was the only coin I have ever had to offer. I told him that a man who watches a thing long enough learns the difference between the ordinary and the ordinary seeming, and that the whole of what I had done because I stood a narrow stone stair for 9 years and could not make myself forget a wax seal the wrong color. Move me somewhere grander, I said, and give the stair to a man who has not learned to watch it, and one night the small wrong thing will come down it again in a traveling cloak, and there will be no one on the low turn who notices. Leave me my post, your majesty. Let me keep your door. The keeping of a king is not done in the grand rooms. It is done on the stair, by the man who is paid to see nothing and had better see everything. He let me stay. I stood the inner stair the rest of his reign, and I stand it still under his son, and I will stand it, God willing, until my knees give out or my eyes do. People who hear the story make me into something I am not, a hero, they say, a savior of kings. But I will tell you what I told Adela in the cold room before any of it. It was never courage, and it was barely loyalty. It was only that I noticed a small wrong thing and could not let it go, and kept my eyes when it would have been easier to keep only my silence. That is the whole of a king's guard, in the end. Not the rifle he may not fire, nor the stillness the tourists come to marvel at. Only this, that when the wrong thing comes down the stair dressed as the ordinary in the dark, at the hour no one is meant to be watching, there is a man on the low turn who is watching anyway. Keep your eyes. That is the post. Everything else is just standing still.